Welcome. This is Thomas Adams coming to you to talk about ethical egoism. What is ethical egoism? Ethical egoism is a way in which we see the world where we put ourselves first and foremost in that characterization. We are really Zeus on top of our own constructed Mount Olympus. Now, ancient Athens, ancient Greece can give us another allegory to use in this perspective. If we think of the allegory of the chariot, it was Plato's first psychological analysis of the soul itself, seeing that the soul was constantly in tension, that what drove our actions was really something rather dynamic and, as aforesaid, in tension. You had the chariot itself and the charioteer holding on to the reins, and then two horses comprising the team. You had the white steer of the will and the dark horse of desire. And the only way to keep things functioning was to make sure that the charioteer could at least control the controllable horse, which was the white steer. The dark horse, the horse of desire, was always going to be going its own way, twisting and turning throughout in an unconventional and unpredictable manner, somewhat like I'm doing with this video. But the white steer of the will, the control of the will, the control of that was going to allow for a functioning dynamic for the individual. Now, many centuries after this initial psychological analysis, Sigmund Freud talked about the same dynamic, but just using different terms. Instead of the horse of desire, he used the id. And instead of the white spirited horse of the will, he used the ego. So ethical egoism can focus in on this connection between the Platonic and the Freudian concepts of the soul, or more secularly understood, what drives us forth in our ethical understanding. Now, that ego, that horse that allows us to make decisions, focusing in on that, turning this particular into a universal, which is what we can do when we take a word and add ism into it. This egoism, as connected to ethics, can show us an interesting way of perceiving of our actions. Now, later philosophers, later thinkers, thought about the ego as having two different dynamics. Think of the chariot as not having two horses, but just one. There are those who would think that in the course of our lives, the charioteer is only guided by a white horse. Everything is rather bright. Everything is rather light in that context. This would be like Rousseau's Romantic Sentimentalism. Things can only get better. Society provides fetters on that. We should be allowed to pursue that which we want. It's a very positive view of ethics and the ego. There are also those who, turning away in an opposite distinction, may see things a little bit more darkly. They see more of a context that is found that has a darker hue. This would be like Thomas Hobbes in the Leviathan, seeing the natural state of man as being nasty, brutish, and short. For him, the chariot just has one horse, the dark horse of desire, that can only be reined in by not only a superego, but a super leader. In his famous work, The Leviathan, the original cover art showed an individual larger than life across the horizon of human experience, able to hold with sword and scepter everything within its grasp, something that could hold in the desiring aspects of man. Now, these two are pretty, we could even say, utilitarian in terms of just going for a particular function. And they see things in a particular way with a particular utility. But I would ask that we look at the situation using a different level of analysis found within the Chariot and its allegory. Think of the movie Ben Hur. The climactic scene in the movie is that in which you have the showdown between the antagonist and the protagonist. And in that, you have another allegory of sorts, an agon, the place of ultimate achievement that is happening. The protagonist, Ben Hur, on the one hand, is the one who is bringing forth his perceived goals of goodness. He has the chariot of white horses. On the other hand, what we have is his antagonist, who feels that he is in the right, in the light, and what he is able to do is to bring forth rule and order in the dominion of Rome itself. Now, what we have here is an interesting contradistinction as found within how the chariot analogy of the ego can work its way into our lives. In ethical egoism, we tend to see our point of view in a much brighter light than those of others. We are the ones that are the determiners. We should determine things based upon our best self-interest, either in terms of a philosophical Stoic understanding or an Epicureanism, maybe leading into more of a hedonistic understanding. But either way we do, we have to put things in a little bit of a broader horizon. Now, in a cultural context, or even a modern context, we tend to see ourselves like Ben Hur. We see ourselves as the ones mounted upon the white steeds, those that are doing the best in terms of our own views, and those that are going against us are those in the other chariot, the chariot driven by their desires. Or, in a little bit different perspective, we see that we may look at the motives of others as not being as pure as our own, or we may look at others in the worst possible light. We may add a dark hue of desire to what they are doing and possibly be misrepresenting their views in an overly Hobbesian way, that they are out for themselves in a brutish context. Whereas ourself, what we are doing, might be more in line with that romantic sentimentalism. That we are undoubtedly on the right path, or on the right course of action, the right track that will lead us to victory. Now, with ethical egoism, the thing to keep in mind about not only the chariot analogy that we have, focusing in on the will, are we ultimately the one that can make the decision? Are we ultimately the one that is Zeus atop our own self-constructed, mountain, Mount Olympus? Well, we have to make that decision for ourselves. It's an ethical subjectivism that seeks to be more universal. And it can be applied in different endeavors. Economically, Adam Smith's approach of laissez-faire economics might be seen as an ethical egoism. Our own federalist structure as perceived, especially by James Madison in Federalist Number 10. The expanse of America being able to contain in a artificial Leviathan-like context the desires and even competing animosities of mankind. Ethical egoism is not only a philosophical ideal, but one that either primarily or secondarily is considered within our own context. The horizons over our shoulders can present us with two alternatives. Do we go for one or do we go for the other? And with that egoism, we are the determining factor. We are the ones that have to ultimately decide where the chariot of our lives is going to lead. And if our ego can hold in check the wisdom of the superego and the desire of the id, and no matter which way that we choose, the results itself may shed a further light on our ultimate journey. Thank you.